In the small, quiet town of Maplewood, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with maple trees that turned golden in the fall, and the air always carried a faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing much ever happened to shake things up. For Megan Wilson, this predictability was both comforting and suffocating. Megan was a sophomore at Maplewood High School, a bright girl with a sharp mind and big dreams. She loved reading books borrowed from the library and spent hours scribbling notes in her worn-out notebook during class. Her teachers often praised her for her hard work and determination, but behind closed doors, they whispered about how unfortunate it was that she didn't come from a family with money or connections. Megan's father, John Wilson, worked as the school janitor, a job he had held for nearly 2 decades. While John took pride in keeping the school clean and running smoothly, his position made him invisible to most people. He was polite, humble, and always greeted students with a warm smile, yet few noticed him beyond nodding politely when passing by. Despite their modest means, Megan and her father shared a strong bond. They lived in a tiny apartment on the edge of town, where evenings were filled with laughter, simple meals, and stories about their day. Megan often helped her dad with small tasks after school, whether it was organizing supplies in the storage room or sweeping the hallways before heading home. Though some kids teased her for being the janitor's daughter, Megan tried not to let it bother him. Deep down, however, she couldn't help feeling like an outsider among her peers, many of whom came from wealthier families. One crisp autumn afternoon, everything changed. Megan was tidying up the principal's office after hours, something she occasionally did to earn extra credit for her community service project. As she dusted the shelves, she overheard Principal Richard Grayson speaking loudly on the phone. His voice was tense, almost angry, and curiosity got the better of her. Through the half-open door, she caught snippets of the conversation. "This isn't fair," Grayson snapped. "Why should I have to bend the rules just because their parents donate to the school? It sets a bad example." The person on the other end of the line mumbled something Megan couldn't quite hear, but Grayson's response was clear. Fine. But if word gets out, I'll deny it. You know how these things go." Megan froze, gripping the feather duster tightly in her hands. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but what she heard troubled her deeply. It sounded like Principal Grayson was admitting to favoring certain students simply because their families gave money to the school. This wasn't right. It went against everything Megan believed in. Education was supposed to be fair, a chance for everyone to succeed based on merit, not wealth. For days, Megan wrestled with what to do. Should she tell someone? Or would speaking up only make things worse? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Finally, she decided to write an anonymous letter to the school board, detailing what she had overheard. She hoped it would spark a conversation about fairness and accountability, without putting herself directly in the spotlight. When the letter arrived at the school board headquarters, it caused quite a stir. Members debated its contents heatedly, unsure whether to take action or dismiss it as mere gossip. Word eventually reached Principal Grayson, who immediately suspected foul play. Who could have written such a thing? And why now? Grayson began investigating quietly, reviewing security footage and questioning staff members. When he realized that Megan had been in his office around the time of the call, suspicion fell squarely on her shoulders. Though there was no concrete evidence linking her to the letter, Grayson saw an opportunity to deflect attention away from himself. If he could pin the blame on someone else, someone powerless, it might save his reputation. The following Monday morning, Megan was summoned to Grayson's office. Her heart raced as she walked down the empty hallway, wondering what this could be about. Inside, Grayson sat behind his desk, his expression cold and unreadable. Without preamble, he accused Megan of vandalizing school property, a claim so absurd it left her speechless. "I don't understand," Megan stammered. "I would never—" "Save it," Grayson interrupted sharply. "We have witnesses who saw you sneaking around last week. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges." "But that's not true," Megan protested, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was just cleaning," Grayson leaned forward, his tone menacing. Listen carefully, young lady. Your behavior has been unacceptable and we won't tolerate it here. Consider yourself expelled. Shock rippled through Megan as the words sank in. Expelled? For something she didn't even do? She wanted to argue, to defend herself. But Grayson cut her off again. You can pack your things and leave, effective immediately. Stumbling out of the office, Megan felt numb. How could this happen? All her hard work, all her dreams, they were slipping through her fingers because of a lie. As news spread throughout, the school whispers followed her wherever she went. Some students believed Grayson's story. Others weren't sure what to think. Either way, Megan felt isolated, betrayed by the very institution she had trusted. That evening, sitting across from her father at their kitchen table, Megan broke down completely. Through sobs, she explained what had happened. John listened silently, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. We'll fix this, he said firmly, no matter what it takes. But deep down, Megan wondered if fixing it was even possible. Life as she knew it had unraveled in a single day, leaving her unsure of what lay ahead. Little did she know, fate had something extraordinary in store, something that would change, not only her life but the entire town of Maplewood forever. The days following Megan's expulsion were some of the hardest she had ever faced. The weight of the injustice pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. Her father, John, did everything he could to comfort her, but even his kind words couldn't erase the sting of being wrongfully accused. Megan spent most of her time in her room, staring out the window at the maple trees swaying in the breeze. She replayed the events over and over in her mind, searching for answers that wouldn't come. Why had Principal Grayson targeted her? What had she done to deserve this? John, however, wasn't ready to give up. He marched into Maplewood High the next morning, determined to speak with Principal Grayson face to face. When he entered the office, the receptionist barely glanced up from her desk. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that suggested she already knew why he was there. "I need to see Mr. Grayson," John said firmly. "It's about my daughter." The receptionist hesitated before nodding toward the principal's closed door. "Go ahead, knock first." John knocked twice and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Grayson looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wilson," he said coolly, "what brings you here?" "I want to know why you expelled Megan," John replied, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "She didn't vandalize anything. You know that as well as I do." Grayson leaned back in his chair, folding his hands neatly on the desk. "I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself," he said smoothly. "Witnesses saw her behaving suspiciously, and we can't ignore that." "There are no witnesses," John shot back. "You're just trying to cover your own mistakes. I heard what you said in your office that day, about favoring rich kids because their parents donate money. That's not fair, and you know it." Grayson's face darkened, but he didn't deny the accusation. Instead, he stood up and walked around the desk, towering over John. "Listen carefully," he said in a low, threatening voice. "Megan broke the rules, and she has to face the consequences. If you keep pushing this, you might find yourself looking for a new job." For a moment, John considered arguing further, but he realized it was pointless. Grayson wasn't going to admit the truth, not now, not ever. With a heavy heart, he turned and left the office, feeling more defeated than he had in years. Back home, Megan tried to focus on something, anything, to distract herself from the chaos swirling around her. She flipped through old textbooks, wrote letters she never intended to send, and even attempted to bake cookies using a recipe her mother had taught her years ago. Nothing worked. Every task felt meaningless. Every thought led back to the same question. What was she supposed to do now? One afternoon, as Megan sat on the front steps of their apartment building, she noticed Ethan Carter walking by. Ethan was a senior at Maplewood High, tall and lanky with curly brown hair and a friendly smile. He wasn't one of the popular kids, but he wasn't invisible either. Most students liked him because he was easygoing and always willing to lend a hand. Megan had spoken to him only a handful of times, usually when they passed each other in the hallway or during group projects, but she remembered how kind he had been whenever their paths crossed. "Hey," Ethan said, stopping when he saw her. "How are you holding up?" Megan shrugged, unsure of how to respond. "Okay, I guess." Ethan sat down beside her, brushing a stray leaf off the step. "I heard what happened. About the expulsion." "Of course you did," Megan muttered. "Everyone knows by now." "Well, I don't think you did it," Ethan said simply. "And neither do a lot of other people." Megan looked at him surprised. "Really?" "Yeah." Ethan nodded. "Grayson's got a reputation for playing favorites. Half the school thinks he made the whole thing up to save face." "That doesn't change anything," Megan said bitterly. "He still ruined my life." "I get that," Ethan replied. "But maybe there's a way to fight back. Have you thought about talking to someone outside the school? Like a reporter? Or, I don't know, someone with influence?" Megan shook her head. "Who would listen to me? I'm just the janitor's daughter." "You're more than that," Ethan said firmly. "You're smart, brave, and you stood up for what's right. That counts for something." His words caught Megan off guard. No one had spoken to her like that in days, not since the expulsion. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. "What if?" Ethan hesitated, then continued. "What if I talk to my uncle? He's pretty powerful and he might be able to help." "Your uncle?" Megan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah. Daniel Harper. Ever heard of him?" The name rang a bell. Daniel Harper was a billionaire businessman who had started his company from scratch and built it into a global empire. He was also known for supporting causes related to education and social justice. Megan had seen his name in the news once or twice, but never imagined she'd have any connection to him. "He's really busy," Ethan admitted. "But I think he'd care about this. He grew up poor too, so he understands what it's like to be treated unfairly." Megan didn't know what to say. The idea of reaching out to someone like Daniel Harper seemed impossible. Yet Ethan's confidence was contagious. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to set things right. "Do you think he'd actually listen?" Megan asked cautiously. "I'll make sure he does," Ethan promised. "Leave it to me." Over the next few days, Ethan worked tirelessly to arrange a meeting between Megan and his uncle. He called Daniel's assistant, explained the situation, and emphasized how important it was. To everyone's surprise, Daniel agreed to meet them personally. A few days later, Megan found herself sitting in Daniel Harper's sleek downtown office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Daniel was younger than Megan expected, with sharp features and a commanding presence. Despite his wealth and success, he greeted her warmly, offering her a seat and a glass of water. As Ethan summarized the events leading up to Megan's expulsion, Daniel listened intently, his expression growing darker with each passing minute. When Ethan finished speaking, Daniel turned to Megan. "Is all of this true?" he asked gently. Megan nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Every word. I didn't do anything wrong, but Principal Grayson wouldn't listen. He just wanted someone to blame." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, in a calm but resolute voice, he spoke. "This isn't right, and I promise you it won't stand." Megan stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Daniel said, leaning forward, "that we're going to fix this. Together." As Megan left the office that evening, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in weeks. For the first time since the expulsion, she allowed herself to believe that justice might still be possible. Little did she know, Daniel Harper wasn't just planning to help her. He was preparing to shake Maplewood High to its core. The next morning, the quiet town of Maplewood woke up to a sound that no one had ever heard before. A deep rumble echoed through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Students and teachers alike rushed outside to see what was happening. Hovering above the football field was a sleek black helicopter, its blades slicing through the crisp autumn air. The sight was surreal, like something out of a movie. People pointed and whispered, their faces filled with confusion and awe. The helicopter descended gracefully onto the field. A hush fell over the crowd. The door slid open, and out stepped Daniel Harper, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His presence commanded attention. There was no mistaking that this was a man who was used to being in charge. Behind him followed two men in dark suits, carrying briefcases and looking every bit like they meant business. Cameras clicked furiously as reporters who had somehow been tipped off began snapping photos and shouting questions. Principal Richard Grayson watched from his office window, his face pale with shock. He had no idea why Daniel Harper, or anyone else for that matter, was at his school. Panic bubbled inside him as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was this about Megan? Had she really gone to someone powerful enough to cause such a scene? For a moment, Grayson considered locking himself in his office and pretending he wasn't there. But it was too late. Within minutes, Daniel and his team were striding purposefully toward the school building, flanked by curious students and staff. When Daniel entered the main hallway, all eyes were on him. Teachers stopped mid-sentence and students froze where they stood. Even the usual chatter of lockers slamming shut and sneakers squeaking against the floor came to a halt. Daniel didn't hesitate. He headed straight for Grayson's office, his expression unreadable but clearly determined. When he reached the door, he knocked once, hard, and then pushed it open without waiting for permission. Grayson looked up from his desk, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Mr. Harper," he stammered, standing quickly. What brings you here?" Daniel ignored the question and took a seat across from Grayson, motioning for his team to close the door behind them. The two men in suits moved to either side of the room, setting down their briefcases and pulling out folders filled with papers. One of them placed a small digital recorder on the desk and pressed record. Grayson's eyes darted nervously between Daniel and the device, his mind racing to figure out what was going on. "I'm here to talk about Megan Wilson," Daniel said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. "And I want answers." Grayson swallowed hard, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Megan Wilson violated school rules," he replied stiffly. "She was expelled for her actions." "Actions?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Care? To elaborate?" "She vandalized school property," Grayson said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We have witnesses who saw her behaving suspiciously." "That's funny," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "Because I have footage that proves otherwise." With a nod to one of his assistants, the man opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen a few times before turning it toward Grayson. On the display was security camera footage showing Megan walking through the halls during the time of the alleged vandalism. She was alone, carrying cleaning supplies, and clearly not engaging in any destructive behavior. The video was time-stamped and crystal clear, leaving no room for doubt. Grayson's face turned red as he realized he'd been caught in a lie. "This doesn't prove anything," he said weakly. "Maybe she did it earlier or later." "Enough," Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You expelled a student without evidence because you wanted to protect yourself. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." Grayson sank back into his chair, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced at the recorder still running on his desk and felt a wave of dread wash over him. This wasn't just a conversation anymore, it was an investigation. "I can explain," Grayson pleaded, his tone desperate. "It was a mistake, a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Daniel repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Grayson. You abused your power to punish an innocent girl because you thought you could get away with it. But you underestimated her, and you underestimated me." For the first time in years, Grayson felt truly powerless. He opened his mouth to argue further, but Daniel held up a hand to silence him. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel continued. "You're going to reinstate Megan Wilson immediately, publicly apologize to her and her family, and ensure that nothing like this happens again. If you don't, I'll make sure the entire town knows exactly how corrupt you are. And trust me, you won't like the consequences." Grayson nodded frantically, too scared to do anything else. Yes, yes, of course, he mumbled. I'll take care of it right away. Good. Daniel stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Oh, and one more thing, he added as he reached the door. I'll be donating a significant amount of money to improve resources for underprivileged students at this school. Consider it my way of ensuring fairness moving forward. With that, Daniel turned and walked out of the office, leaving Grayson trembling in his seat. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers as they saw Daniel emerge. Reporters swarmed him, firing off questions about why he was there and what he planned to do next. Daniel smiled confidently, giving vague but reassuring answers that hinted at big changes coming to Maplewood High. Meanwhile, Megan and Ethan watched the scene unfold from a distance. Megan couldn't believe what she was seeing. Just days ago, she had felt completely defeated, convinced that her future was ruined. Now, thanks to Daniel Harper, everything seemed possible again. As Daniel approached them, his expression softened. It's done, he said simply. You're back in school and Grayson won't be bothering you anymore. Megan blinked back tears, overwhelmed by gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to, Daniel replied. Just keep fighting for what's right. That's payment enough. Ethan grinned, clapping Megan lightly on the shoulder. Told you he'd help. Later that afternoon, Principal Grayson made a public announcement over the intercom, apologizing for his mistake and welcoming Megan back to Maplewood High. The news spread like wildfire, and soon everyone was talking about what had happened. Some students cheered for Megan, while others grumbled about the disruption caused by the helicopter landing. Regardless of their opinions, one thing was clear: life at Maplewood High would never be the same again. That evening, Megan sat at the kitchen table with her father, replaying the day's events in her mind. John listened quietly, pride shining in his eyes. You stood up for what's right, he said, and look what happened. People noticed. Megan smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still people who doubted her. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. With friends like Ethan and allies like Daniel Harper, she had the strength to face whatever came next. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Megan couldn't help but wonder what other surprises life might have in store. One thing was certain: she was ready to find out. The days following Daniel Harper's dramatic arrival at Maplewood High were unlike anything the school, or the town, had ever experienced. News of the Billionaire's intervention spread far beyond Maplewood, making headlines in local newspapers, and even catching the attention of national media outlets. Reporters flocked to the small town, eager to tell the story of how a powerful man had stepped in to defend an ordinary girl against injustice. For Megan Wilson, it was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Megan returned to school the very next day, walking through the front doors with her head held high. She wasn't sure what kind of reception to expect, but the response was warmer than she could have imagined. Many students who had once doubted her now approached her with apologies, admitting they hadn't realized how unfair Principal Grayson had been. Teachers greeted her with smiles, some even pulling her aside to express their admiration for her courage. It was as if the entire school had woken up to the reality of the situation, thanks to Daniel's intervention. Principal Grayson, on the other hand, seemed like a shadow of his former self. He avoided eye contact with students and staff, keeping mostly to his office. Rumors circulated that he was under intense scrutiny from the school board, which had launched an official investigation into his conduct. Parents began calling meetings to demand transparency, and several wealthy families who had previously supported Grayson started distancing themselves from him. The once unshakable authority figure now looked fragile, his reputation crumbling around him. Despite the positive changes, Megan found it hard to fully relax. The weight of being at the center of so much attention lingered, making her feel exposed. She often caught whispers in the hallways or felt eyes on her during class. Some students still harbored resentment, believing she had somehow manipulated Daniel Harper to get revenge on Grayson. These doubts stung, but Megan reminded herself that not everyone would understand, and that was okay. One person who never doubted her was Ethan Carter. Since the day he introduced her to his uncle, Ethan had become one of Megan's closest allies. He checked in on her regularly, offering encouragement and standing by her side whenever she needed support. His presence brought a sense of normalcy back into her life, helping her navigate the chaos that surrounded her. "Hey," Ethan said one afternoon as they sat together in the library. "You doing okay?" Megan shrugged, flipping absently through the pages of a textbook. "I guess it's just weird, you know? Everyone acting like everything's fine now, when nothing really feels fine." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "It'll take time. People don't change overnight, especially when they're used to things being a certain way." "I know," Megan replied softly. "But sometimes I wonder if all this attention is worth it. What if things go back to how they were before once the reporters leave?" "They won't," Ethan said firmly. "Not if we keep pushing for change. You've already started something big, Megan. Don't let anyone, including yourself, forget that." His words gave her strength, reminding her why she had spoken out in the first place. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a fairer system for everyone. Inspired by Ethan's encouragement, Megan decided to take action. With Daniel Harper's blessing, she began working on a proposal to establish a student advisory committee at Maplewood High. The idea was simple: give students a voice in decisions that affected them, ensuring that no one could abuse their power, again without consequences. As Megan worked on the proposal, Daniel remained deeply involved in her life. True to his word, he donated a substantial sum of money to the school, earmarked specifically for scholarships and resources for low-income students. He also arranged for mentors from his company to visit Maplewood regularly, offering career guidance and workshops to help students explore opportunities beyond graduation. Megan marveled at how quickly the school transformed under his influence. New computers appeared in the library, classrooms received updated textbooks, and extracurricular programs expanded to include activities that had long been cut due to budget constraints. Daniel's generosity extended beyond material improvements. He took a personal interest in Megan's future, inviting her to visit his corporate headquarters for a day. During the trip, Megan toured the offices, met employees, and attended meetings where executives discussed strategies for tackling social issues. It was an eye-opening experience, showing her firsthand how businesses could use their resources to create meaningful change. By the end of the day, Daniel pulled her aside for a private conversation. "You have potential, Megan," he said earnestly. "Don't waste it. Use your voice, your intelligence, and your determination to make the world better, not just for yourself, but for others." Megan nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I will. Thank you. For everything." Back at school, Megan threw herself into her studies, determined to excel despite the challenges she'd faced. Her teachers noticed the shift, praising her renewed focus and dedication. Even Principal Grayson, though reluctant, couldn't deny her academic achievements. When midterm grades were posted, Megan ranked among the top students in her grade, a feat that earned her recognition at an assembly honoring academic excellence. The ceremony took place in the auditorium, packed with students, parents, and faculty members. As Megan walked onto the stage to receive her award, the audience erupted into applause. For a moment, she froze, overwhelmed by the sound. Then, glancing down at Ethan cheering wildly from the front row, she smiled and accepted the certificate, with quiet pride. Afterward, as she mingled with classmates and teachers, Daniel Harper appeared unexpectedly at the edge of the crowd. Dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, he blended in surprisingly well among the townsfolk. When Megan spotted him, she excused herself and hurried over. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised but delighted. "I wanted to see you." "Shine," Daniel replied with a grin. "And I wasn't disappointed," Megan laughed, shaking her head. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, I did," Daniel countered. "This is important, you're important." His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long Megan had doubted her worth, convinced that her background made her less valuable than others. But moments like this reminded her that she mattered. Not because of where she came from, but because of who she was. As the weeks passed, life at Maplewood High continued to evolve. The student advisory committee Megan proposed gained traction, with dozens of students signing up to participate. They held regular meetings to discuss issues ranging from bullying to outdated policies, slowly chipping away at the barriers that had long plagued the school. Even Principal Grayson, though reluctant at first, began attending these sessions, albeit reluctantly. Whether out of genuine remorse or fear of further backlash, no one could say. But his willingness to listen marked a turning point. For Megan, the journey was far from over. There were still battles to fight, injustices to address, and dreams to pursue. Yet for the first time in a long while she felt hopeful. Hopeful that change was possible. Hopeful that her voice could make a difference, and hopeful that she wasn't alone in her fight. Little did she know, the ripple effects of her courage were only beginning to unfold. Across the town, people inspired by her story started speaking out against inequality in their own lives. Teachers advocated for better pay, parents pushed for improved facilities, and students demanded greater accountability from those in charge. Maplewood was waking up, shedding its sleepy complacency for a brighter, bolder future. And at the heart of it all stood Megan Wilson, a girl who had dared to challenge the status quo and sparked a movement that would leave a lasting impact on generations to come. Months passed, and the changes at Maplewood High continued to unfold. The school was no longer the same place it had been before Megan Wilson's expulsion and Daniel Harper's dramatic intervention. Slowly but surely, a culture of fairness and accountability began to take root, replacing the old ways that had allowed favoritism and injustice to thrive. For Megan, this transformation was both rewarding and challenging. She found herself balancing her studies with her growing role as a voice for change, all while trying to stay grounded in the face of so much attention. The student advisory committee she had proposed became one of the most active groups on campus. Students from every grade level joined, eager to share their ideas and concerns. They met weekly in the library, discussing everything from outdated textbooks to unfair grading practices. At first, some teachers and administrators resisted the committee's suggestions, dismissing them as impractical or unnecessary. But Megan refused to back down. With Ethan by her side, she led discussions, presented evidence, and pushed for real action. Over time, even the skeptics began to see the value of listening to students' perspectives. Principal Grayson, though still present, seemed like a shadow of his former self. He attended committee meetings only when required, sitting quietly in the corner and rarely contributing. The once authoritative figure now avoided conflict, knowing that any misstep could reignite scrutiny from the school board, or worse, from Daniel Harper. His days as principal were numbered. Whispers spread that he would retire at the end of the school year, unable to handle the pressure of rebuilding trust with the community. Megan didn't dwell on Grayson's downfall. Instead, she focused on the future. With Daniel's support, she worked tirelessly to ensure that the improvements at Maplewood High weren't just temporary fixes, but lasting changes. New policies were implemented to prevent favoritism, including stricter guidelines for handling disciplinary actions and clearer communication between staff and students. A scholarship fund was established in Megan's name, providing financial aid to low-income students who dreamed of attending college. These initiatives not only transformed the school, but also inspired others in the town to demand similar reforms in their own workplaces and neighborhoods. One afternoon, after a particularly productive committee meeting, Megan sat with Ethan in the cafeteria. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation as students enjoyed their lunch break. Megan picked at her sandwich deep in thought. "You've done so much already," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Isn't it kind of crazy how far we've come?" Megan smiled faintly, glancing around the bustling room. "It feels surreal, sometimes like I never expected any of this to happen." "None of us did," Ethan replied. "But look at what you've started. People are actually paying attention now. That's huge." "I know," Megan said softly. "But I can't help wondering if it'll last. What happens when everyone forgets about me? Or when Daniel moves on to his next project?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then you remind them why it matters. You're not doing this for recognition. You're doing it because it's right. And as long as you keep standing up for what's fair, people will follow." His words reassured her as they always did. Yet beneath her determination, Megan couldn't ignore the lingering doubts. She knew that fighting for justice came with sacrifices, and she often wondered if she was strong enough to carry the weight of such responsibility. Still, she reminded herself of the countless lives being impacted by the changes she had helped bring about. That thought alone kept her going. As graduation approached, Megan threw herself into her studies, determined to finish high school on a high note. Her hard work paid off when she received acceptance letters from several prestigious universities, each offering generous scholarships. It was a moment of triumph, not just for her but for her father, John, who beamed with pride whenever he talked about his daughter's accomplishments. For years, he had worked tirelessly to provide for Megan, often sacrificing his own dreams to ensure hers could come true. Now seeing her succeed filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in decades. Daniel Harper remained a steadfast supporter throughout this journey. He attended Megan's final committee meeting, where students presented their progress to the school board. Sitting in the back of the room, he listened intently, nodding approvingly as Megan outlined the group's achievements. Afterward, he pulled her aside for a private conversation. "You've exceeded my expectations," he said warmly. "I'm proud of you, Megan." "Thank you," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "Yes, you could have," Daniel countered gently. "You're the one who stood up when no one else would. I just gave you the tools to make it happen." His confidence in her meant more than words could express. As they parted ways that day, Megan realized how much she had grown, not just as a student but as a person. She had learned to believe in herself, to trust her instincts, and to fight for what she believed in, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. On graduation day, the entire town turned out to celebrate the senior class. The ceremony took place outdoors, under a clear blue sky with rows of chairs set up on the football field. Parents cheered, cameras flashed, and balloons swayed gently in the breeze. When Megan's name was called, she walked across the stage to thunderous applause. Her classmates rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation that brought tears to her eyes. Even Principal Grayson, watching from the sidelines, offered a reluctant nod of acknowledgement. After receiving her diploma, Megan paused at the microphone to address the crowd. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice rang out strong and steady. "When I was expelled last year, I thought my life was over," she began. "But thanks to the support of my family, friends, and mentors, I learned that setbacks don't define us. It's how we respond to them that matters. This experience taught me the power of speaking up, of standing together, and of believing in the possibility of change." She paused, scanning the sea of faces before continuing. "To my fellow graduates, I want to remind you that your voices matter. Don't be afraid to use them, even when it's hard. The world needs people who are willing to challenge the status quo and fight for what's right. Together, we can create a better future, for ourselves, for our communities, and for generations to come." The audience erupted into cheers, many wiping away tears as Megan stepped down from the stage. Among those applauding was Daniel Harper, who caught her eye and gave her a subtle thumbs up. Ethan hugged her tightly, whispering, "That was amazing." As the ceremony drew to a close, Megan reflected on how far she had come. From the quiet girl who felt invisible to the confident young woman inspiring others, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Yet, she knew this was only the beginning. College awaited her, along with new challenges and opportunities to make a difference. She was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with the same courage and resilience that had carried her this far. That evening, as fireworks lit up the night sky over Maplewood, Megan stood with her father, watching the colorful bursts reflect off the lake. John placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with pride. "You've made me so proud, sweetheart," he said. "Your mother would be proud too." Megan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." The two stood in comfortable silence, taking in the beauty of the moment. For Megan, it was a reminder that no matter where life took her, she would always carry the love and support of those who believed in her. And with that foundation, she knew she could face anything. Little did she know, the impact of her story was spreading far beyond Maplewood. News outlets continued to highlight her journey, inspiring students across the country to speak out against injustice in their own schools. Teachers shared her story in classrooms, using it as an example of how one person's courage could spark meaningful change. Even politicians referenced her efforts when advocating for educational reform. Megan Wilson wasn't just a name anymore. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. And as she prepared to leave Maplewood behind, she vowed to carry that legacy with her wherever she went. Years passed, and Megan Wilson's life took her far from the small town of Maplewood. She graduated at the top of her class from a prestigious university, earning a degree in education policy. Her journey hadn't been easy. There were late nights spent studying, moments of self-doubt, and challenges that tested her resolve. But she never lost sight of why she had started down this path. Inspired by her own experiences, Megan dedicated herself to fighting for fairness and equality in education, determined to ensure that no student would ever face the same injustices she had. After graduation, Megan moved to Washington, D.C., where she began working for a nonprofit organization focused on educational reform. The job was demanding, requiring long hours and constant travel, but it gave her a platform to make a difference on a larger scale. She visited schools across the country, listening to students, teachers, and parents share their struggles. In boardrooms and legislative hearings, she advocated for policies that addressed inequality and provided opportunities for underprivileged youth. Her work earned her recognition, and soon she became a respected voice in the field of education. Despite her success, Megan never forgot her roots. Every summer, she returned to Maplewood to visit her father, John, who still lived in the same apartment they had shared during her high school years. The town had changed since she left. It was bigger now, with new businesses and families moving in. But its heart remained the same. People still remembered her story, often stopping her on the street to thank her for inspiring them to speak up or take action in their own lives. During one of these visits, Megan received an invitation to speak at Maplewood High's annual career turn. At first, she hesitated. Returning to the place where everything had begun felt both exciting and daunting. But after some thought, she accepted, knowing it was an opportunity to encourage the next generation of students. On the morning of the event, Megan arrived at the school early, taking a moment to walk through the familiar hallways. So much had changed since her time there. The once dingy walls were freshly painted and modern technology filled the classrooms. Posters promoting diversity and inclusion lined the corridors, a testament to the progress the school had made. Yet as she stood outside the auditorium, memories flooded back. The whispers, the stares, the fear of being expelled all over again. Shaking off the nostalgia, Megan took a deep breath and stepped inside. The auditorium buzzed with energy as students filed in, chatting excitedly about the speakers scheduled to present that day. When Megan's turn came, she walked onto the stage, greeted by applause. For a moment, she simply looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom reminded her of her younger self. Bright, curious, and full of potential. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "When I was sitting where you are now, I never imagined I'd be standing here today. Back then, I didn't think my voice mattered. I thought I was just the janitor's daughter. A nobody." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Megan smiled softly before continuing. "But something happened that changed everything. I learned that speaking up, even when it's scary, can lead to real change. It taught me that everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter where they come from or what obstacles they face." She went on to share her story, leaving out none of the difficult parts, the expulsion, the rumors, the fear of failure. As she spoke, she noticed students leaning forward, hanging on her every word. Some nodded in agreement, while others scribbled notes furiously in their notebooks. By the end of her speech, the room was silent, save for the sound of pens scratching against paper. "One thing I want you to remember," Megan said, her tone firm yet kind, "is that your voice matters. If you see something wrong, don't stay quiet. Speak up, stand together, and don't let anyone tell you that you're too young or too powerless to create change." When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, louder than she had expected. Students rushed to the front of the stage, eager to ask questions or simply thank her for sharing her story. One girl, barely a freshman, approached shyly, clutching a notebook to her chest. "I'm scared to say anything," the girl admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if people laugh at me?" Megan knelt down to meet her eye level, offering a reassuring smile. "I was scared too," she said gently, "but keeping quiet doesn't fix anything. Start small, talk to someone you trust, find friends who believe in you, and remember, you're stronger than you think." The girl nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes before hurrying back to her seat. Watching her go, Megan felt a surge of pride. This was why she did what she did, not for awards or recognition, but to remind others that they weren't alone. Later that evening, Megan joined her father and Ethan for dinner at their favorite diner. Ethan, who had gone on to become a teacher at Maplewood High, regaled them with stories about his students and the positive changes he had witnessed in the school. John listened proudly, chiming in with anecdotes of his own. As the three laughed and reminisced, Megan realized how lucky she was to have such unwavering support. "You've done so much good," John said, raising his glass in a toast. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thanks, Dad," Megan replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of it without you, or Ethan." Ethan grinned, clinking his glass against hers. "Here's to making the world a better place, one step at a time." As the years rolled on, Megan continued to build on her legacy. She published a book detailing her journey, which became a bestseller and inspired countless readers. Schools across the country adopted programs modeled after the student advisory committee she had started at Maplewood High. Teachers and administrators reached out to her for advice, eager to learn how they could foster environments of fairness and inclusivity. Back in Maplewood, the town thrived under the reforms Megan had helped implement. Principal Grayson eventually retired, replaced by a compassionate leader chosen by the community. Under the new principal's guidance, the school became a model institution, celebrated for its commitment to transparency and equity. Parents who once worried about favoritism now trusted the system to treat their children fairly. Students, emboldened by Megan's example, spoke up more freely, knowing their voices would be heard. Even Daniel Harper stayed connected to Megan, checking in occasionally to see how she was doing. Though he rarely meddled in her work, his belief in her abilities never wavered. "You're changing the world," he told her during one of their calls. "Don't stop." Megan carried those words with her always, using them as fuel to keep pushing forward. She knew the fight for justice was far from over. There would always be new battles to wage, new systems to challenge, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Across the country, people inspired by her story were rising up, demanding fairness and accountability in their own communities. One sunny spring afternoon, several years after graduating, Megan returned to Maplewood High to deliver another motivational speech. Standing on the same stage where she had once felt invisible, she looked out at the eager faces before her and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "The world isn't perfect," she told the students, her voice warm and sincere, "but it can be better. And it starts with you, with each of you believing in your ability to make a difference. Don't wait for someone else to fix things. Be the person who steps up, who speaks out, who fights for what's right. Because when you do, you inspire others to do the same." As she stepped off the stage, applause ringing in her ears, Megan felt a deep sense of peace. She had come full circle, from the quiet girl who doubted her worth to the confident woman inspiring others to dream big. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as she walked out of the auditorium, surrounded by smiling, faces, and heartfelt thanks, she knew one thing for certain. The ripple effects of courage and kindness would continue to spread, touching lives for generations to come.